Welcome, everyone. So, I am continuing a series talking about nervous system responses. And I'm going to continue today by talking about functional freeze. Some people also call this by different names. They either call it flaccid or they call it zombie, or there's some other names out there. I don't think that either of those names are particularly compassionate or kind, even though they may describe certain symptoms quite well. So, with our nervous system, we have basically three different responses. We have fight, flight, and freeze. And so, as part of the freeze response, we have varying degrees in which our system can sort of freeze or shut down, not work very well, kind of hold on and tear. And this can go from everything from a fawn response, which I did a previous video on, where somebody is in a freeze response, but they're still responsive. And what they are doing is typically capitulating, agreeing with, going along with whatever is around them. Essentially, they're either being a bit of a doormat or they are shutting themselves down to such a degree that whatever is happening around them, they're not quite processing. And so they're just saying, like, okay, a lot. They're just agreeing to things to get the sort of stressful situation over. Can also be a personality response as well. Somebody who automatically takes care of other people's needs instead of their own. But let's talk about functional freeze. So there's a reason why it is also sometimes referred to as a flaccid response, um, or even a zombie response, because it refers to a specific degree of freezing of the nervous system. And so this can be determined or thought of as the nervous system shutting down to a greater extent, but the person is still basically functional in their lives. They are essentially able to hold down a job, do the basic chores that they need to in their lives, but anything else in their lives is put on hold, or there's a feeling that the person can't break through that sort of threshold. And so a good example of this is somebody who goes to work, comes home, maybe makes themselves a quick meal or orders out, and then spends the rest of their night watching TV or scrolling social media or playing video games. And every day is that sort of repeat. Where they're in the same routine, going through the motions every day, and anything outside of that routine is basically neglected, or neglected to the point where they get yelled at by a spouse or a roommate, or they absolutely need to take care of it. So people in this type of functional freeze to the outer world may look fairly functional, but they're barely holding on. They are not in a position to experience joy in their life. They typically will not be going into social situations unless forced, because that requires energy. That requires the energy of the body to sort of mobilize and be present. And it really is kind of a freeze state. If we were to extend this metaphor further, we could consider it to be in between the state of flow, so sort of running water, and an ice cube, which is total and complete freeze. This person is sort of on their way to be an ice cube. They are sort of in a solid state, but still a little bit of wiggle room. So as you can tell, There are massive amounts of people that are in a functional freeze state. Um, they, kind of go through the routines of their lives like zombies. They don't do much outside of that. They feel exhausted a lot of times. They feel like they can't really think particularly clearly. And this is because when our bodies are engaged with a freeze state, our brains, our capacity specifically for higher thought, so our frontal lobe essentially starts to shut down. So when somebody is in the depths of a freeze state, which will be a video in the future where they really start to dissociate, maybe they're having a panic attack, maybe they're just entirely shut down or having a meltdown, that capacity to think is completely taken off the table. All that is shouting in the brain are very basic, kind of commands or thoughts like, you are going to die, or, kind of these very emotionally laden, just very simple directives. If we're talking about functional freeze, someone will likely not be able to go into difficult thought. And so we currently have a world where more and more people are going into functional freeze. And so what they want are instant sound bites. They don't want necessarily a lot of complexity. They want things that are sort of, that they could sort of mindlessly watch and then wonder if they saw that series or watched that show. And so this is why, in part, um, why social media is the way that it is, why movies are the way that it is, because people are stuck in a functional freeze state where they cannot process complex thoughts, deep thoughts, that sort of thing. And so if we are talking about how to, kind of get out of this state, the first thought is recognizing that you're in it. It is recognizing that you are in a functional freeze state. Some of the best ways to get out of a functional freeze state are very somatically based and they are very gentle. Essentially, they are about movement, particularly moving the shoulders and moving the hips. These are areas that we tend to store the freeze response in our bodies. And so, if you are in a functional freeze, even doing gentle movements like circles with your hips, kind of like you would do with a hula hoop, moving your shoulders in circles, doing some very basic yoga stretches to open up the pelvis, open up the hips, open up the shoulders, can start to break people out of this freeze cycle. The other thing that tends to break people out of functional freeze is a recognition that their lives are kind of boring and without much meaning, without much socialization sometimes. And so there's a famous book called The Myth of Sisyphus by Camus, where he talks about, well, he only talks about it in the end chapter, but of that Sisyphean myth of, Sisyphus being required for all eternity, punished for all eternity to push that boulder up the hill only for it to come down. And so in the book, what he talks about is a recognition on a deeper level that a lot of people get to with spiritual awakening, that a lot of our lives are kind of programmed and don't have much meaning. And so Camus' suggestion for this was to imagine Sisyphus with a smile, and I would, who am I to argue with Camus? But part of I feel breaking out of this functional freeze state is truly wanting more from your life and recognizing that we do tend to revert to this sort of robotic mode, just going through the motions mode, where we lose access to things like joy, to play, to whimsy, to beauty, to art, to music. And so engaging with the lightness of the world, engaging with life force in simple ways to get out of functional freeze can be very helpful. So listening to some wonderful music if you haven't for a while, doing a bit of dancing, doing a bit of painting, doing a bit of drawing, looking at some beautiful paintings online, some beautiful artwork online, going and smelling some beautiful flowers, or, spending a bit of time outside in the sunlight, reminding yourself of kind of the beauty and the wonder of the world. Do something like check out some, magicians doing sleight of hand, whatever your thing is that will bring in a bit of wonder, a bit of whimsy, a bit of beauty in your life can slowly have this sort of thawing effect for somebody to start moving into their lives more and kind of developing things like hobbies, interests, a sense of play, a sense of heart-centeredness, a sense of joy for living again that will be entirely absent or kind of a distant memory and functional freeze. So thank you for watching, and feel free to watch the whole series on nervous system responses if you'd like to. It's really helpful to understand these states because we can identify them and learn how to work with them on a deeper level when we are in them. We tend to get stuck in our nervous system responses and sometimes even make them our personality. And there are, millions of us stuck in functional freeze, and we don't need to be. We can truly, get out of the thrall of doom scrolling, of looking at our phones endlessly. We can engage with longer form content, with more complex thought, with a movie that actually has a plot, with all of these things that start to get our minds and our hearts engaged in the world again.